I put out a video not too long ago about how Portugal is planning on permanently getting rid of their Golden Visa program, shutting it down in its entirety. And there was quite a few comments, largely from Portuguese people, saying this was great, they should shut it down because, it's terrible for Portugal, etc., etc. And I wanted to take a little bit of time to address this subject of, are Golden Visas actually bad for the people there? Are various citizenship by investment or residency by investment programs bad for the local people? And what should we consider in viewing how one of these maybe should be structured? Obviously, most people are not in a position where they're advising the countries, but I do think it's worth understanding the cost benefit for what's going on, because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there on how these hurt. And actually, I think that in the most part, they can be quite helpful. And most of the arguments are kind of incongruent, but I'll try to cover each of the arguments that I hear made, and we will see, are Golden Visas bad for the countries? Are they bad for the people? Do they drive up real estate costs? Are you in a situation where they attract the wrong people? Do the wrong people get to come in because of Golden Visas? We're gonna cover all that and more. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. If it's your first time, welcome. I am Michael from Offshore Citizen, and we help people go and set themselves up in other countries to do business or to live, to gain more freedom, to protect their assets, to pay lower tax, and frankly, to just have a better life overall. So if you're interested in any of those things, please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendar.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or you can send a message through offshorecitizen.net. Okay, so just quickly talking about Golden Visas and what they are for anyone who's not familiar. Really briefly, it is the idea that you can make some kind of an investment, and based on that investment, you can gain a residency permit, access to that country. In other words, the right to live there. Okay, so residency, right to live, Golden Visa is really referring to paying money. And you can just kind of start by backtracking this a little bit and saying, well, okay, do we want people to come into the country at all? Right? This is a fair question. A country has borders. They, have some sort of an immigration policy. Do you want people to come into your country at all? And in certain cases, you may argue, well, no, I don't think we do want people to come into our country. Fair enough. That's a decision a country can make for themselves. If you decide that, yes, we want people to come into the country, then the question becomes on what basis or who, right? And I think the really logical thing one would assume is, well, we probably want people to come into the country who are going to somehow contribute to the country, and we want to keep people out of the country who are going to be negative to the country, because otherwise, why don't we just have an open border policy, right? So when you think about that, you can ask, all right, well, two sides to this. Number one, what are different ways in which somebody might contribute? And of course, they may be in a situation where they bring talent. They're essentially bringing job, like they're being employed in the country and they're doing something for businesses locally. You may have a situation where they're coming into the country and they are somehow creating jobs through some sort of investment, etc. And you may just have a situation where they're bringing money. Right? It's totally legitimate that somebody's going to come in and they're going to contribute to tax revenues. You have a certain amount of spending that the country is doing to support residents and citizens. One way to go and get more of that is to go and tax more of the local people. Another is to go and get it from foreigners, right? Pretty simple exchange if you think about it in that regard. And then who do you not want? Well, you probably don't want criminals, right? So criminals are out. Great, pretty straightforward. Number two, you probably are in a situation where if you have somebody who's going to take a job away from a local, you generally wouldn't want that, right? And then of course you don't want somebody who's going to be a drain on the system, or you don't want somebody who is going to essentially not contribute, right? So non-contributors, probably not interested in them. People who are going to be a drain on the system somehow, they're going to consume more resources than they bring, not so useful. Somebody who is going to take jobs and opportunities away from locals, not so good, and criminals, not so good. So I think if you were to just design from first principles any sort of an immigration policy that was sound, you would say, all right, how do we set ourselves up so that we attract more of these, we get rid of more of these, okay? I think if somebody disagrees, put it in the comments, let me know. I'd be curious to hear why. It seems really self-evident to me, but maybe somebody disagrees. And so then we can say, all right, well, programs typically, and this by the way goes for all the Golden Visas, have some sort of background check right? So you have to do a criminal record check, which typically goes to your entire life, all the countries you've lived in, et cetera, to see if you have some sort of a criminal record. And pretty much once somebody has a criminal record, almost no countries in the world will allow them to relocate. You can maybe make an argument that that's a little bit unfair because maybe they've served their time, they've changed, whatever, but the reality is that's not how it works under the law. Typically, if you have a criminal record, you're not allowed into the country. And so there's some arguments that suggest, oh, we are allowing bad apples in through some sort of thing. Well, actually, no, this is not true. In reality, the standards of assessing people under golden visas typically are higher than pretty much anything else when it comes to source of funds, when it comes to criminal history, et cetera. So that's just not true. The second thing we might say is okay, well, what about this jobs thing? Now, the jobs thing is always an interesting one to examine because if you're in a situation where you have somebody new who comes and they take a job, but then they're producing and they're spending money into the local economy, that may create room for other jobs. There's a really good book, I think it's called Good Economics for Hard Times. And they kind of go through a lot of the data on what types of people coming and doing jobs creates value versus not. And this goes into, should the US have, made trouble, kind of like redacted the H-1B program, should other programs be allowed, et cetera, right? So anyway, that's a whole other debate I'm not going to cover here because we're covering golden visas. But I think it is worth thinking about, okay, like you want to ideally bring jobs to people. You don't want to have people lose jobs, but you have to consider that when people come, they create demand, and that demand can lead to more jobs as well, right? So there we go. Other things, if you're talking about somebody who's not going to contribute, well, that would be like a financial test. That would be somebody who maybe doesn't have health insurance and is going to rely on your health insurance. These sorts of things are pretty fair, but guess what? Almost all the programs that I'm aware of, and I deal with most of the programs around the world, do require that you have health insurance to come. That's one of the most basic things. You have to pay for health insurance so that you're not going to use their health care system and be a drain on it. So, well, there you go. Typically, a lot of the abilities, rights, privileges, etc., afforded to citizens are not given to these residents. So it's not like they can get all these things for free, etc. Generally, as a resident, that's not the case. And you can choose as a country whether you want to naturalize people. For example, I am here in Dubai today, and in Dubai, they make it very easy for people to come in, but they really don't give a lot for free, right? The locals are treated extremely well. Emiratis get all kinds of stuff for free, but residents, people who are foreigners who have chosen to come and live here, pay for things, and if they don't pay for things, they don't get those things, and that's a pretty fair equation, right? So now what about this contribution thing? So I have some mixed feelings here. First of all, most of the residency by investment programs that come into play are in one of two forms. There is either you start a business and you bring value that way, or you're in a situation where you make some kind of a direct investment, often into real estate, okay? Now, the flip side is usually countries have work visas that are also available. They often have retirement visas that are available. They often have some kind of like special privilege visas for people of particular talent or something like that. And they'll typically have some sort of family reunification visa. These are like really common sets of visas, like reasons for which somebody can enter the country and live. Now, if you're, and here's like a caveat that I want to really impress upon people because there's this very strange concept that seems to get lost, which is people will say, oh, you're letting these people in. And I'm like, well, hang on a second. Those people could come in via another path anyway, in most cases. Let's use Portugal as an example, okay? It is much easier to get a D7 visa, which is basically a retirement visa. You have to demonstrate essentially about $9,000 a year of income. Okay, it's based on euros, so not exactly, but approximately that per year. And that's it, in like recurring income. It's super easy to qualify. Okay, the process is bureaucratic. It takes a few months to get the appointment, et cetera, but really almost anyone can come in that. Versus if you want to go in on a golden visa, you have to pay 280 to 500,000 euros, plus a whole bunch of fees, plus go through a bunch of background checks, plus. I have a bunch of clients who have been waiting for over a year to get approved on their golden visa in Portugal. Okay, like it's a much longer process. It's a much more difficult process. And so I find it really funny when I hear people saying, oh, you're letting people get around the rules or come in some way. It's like, well, they could come in another way. The way that they're choosing to come in, to some extent, is just plain better for you, because if somebody comes in under a retirement visa versus if somebody comes in by investing, which of these two adds more value? They're consuming the same, right? Clearly, somebody's coming into the country, they're getting the same privileges, etc. So their consumption is equal. So the strain on the system is not any different. In both cases, generally, they're not going to work. Often, golden visas don't give you a right to work, although that varies from country to country. In some countries, you can. And so it's not like you're taking away jobs. But in this one, you're injecting a bunch of capital into the economy. In this one, you're not injecting a bunch of capital into the economy. How can you rationally object to this without objecting to this? The only reason you can do that is because there's some kind of like tall poppy syndrome. Hey, we shouldn't allow these bad rich people to come in because that's somehow unfair. But it's really stupid because it's not self-serving. You should be thinking, well, who's going to add the most value? Because we want people to come in who are going to add value, because that's going to make things much easier. Now, I'm going to caveat this around. I don't necessarily believe it is really great for a country to do programs based on real estate investing. Why not? Because fundamentally, where's the value add when you have somebody do real estate investing? Somebody comes in, they buy a property, it's worth 500,000 euros. Okay, well, usually that property is probably going to be overpriced because somebody knows that that is the case. You're definitely attracting more capital into there. Yes, this means that builders can make more money. This means there's an industry of people who sell those services around it. Lawyers make more money. People who are realtors are making more money. There's probably some administrative staff who are making more money. And all of those people are going to spend into the economy, and so there's going to be some sort of a net benefit there. But this is relatively small. It's not like a massive amount of money that's coming in. In addition to that, you do have additional upwards price pressure on real estate. And so the concern is, well, prices are going up for locals. And I think from a purchasing perspective, that is probably true. Okay, so if you're looking at a place like Lisbon, the prices have gone up a lot. Now they've gone up partially due to golden visas, but partially due to a broader question, which I'm going to come to in a second. So I think there's some fair argument there. The much better way to do it would be something a little bit like what Singapore will do, where Singapore will require that you set up a company and you'll hire a couple people and you spend a minimum amount of money in the country. And if you do that, then they're going to give you a visa. I think this is very sensible because there's some sort of minimum tax that is going to be associated with that much economic activity generated. You're actually hiring people, so you're creating jobs. Those people who have jobs now are in a situation where they're producing some value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So the Singapore system, as usual, Singapore is a much smarter country than most countries, is smarter done than a golden visa that just allows you to buy some real estate and get residency. This being said, let's go back to this question of, does it push up the prices of real estate? So certainly, certain types of properties tend to be priced more expensive because if, for example, you can get a golden visa based on investing 350,000 euros, and a property would normally be listed for 320, well, now it's probably listed for 350 because they know that the person can get the golden visa by doing this, and so why not squeeze an extra 30,000 euros out of it, right? That sort of effect does happen. So you do get some overpricing within markets if it is totally open to whatever projects they want being purchased. However, in the big picture, oh, and by the way, let's realize somebody is, of course, selling that, so somebody is gaining that differential. So there's some effect that is worth noting. Anyway, so the other side of it that takes place at more or less the same time is you have a situation where rents can be affected. Now, here's the thing: if I come in and I just buy property, but I'm not actually going to live there, is that going to push up rental prices? No, it's not, because I might buy a property and that property is sitting vacant and I want to generate a rental yield off of it, so I'm going to rent it out. So that's point one, which is pretty worthwhile to note. The second thing that is related, that is worthwhile to note, is that you're in a situation where very often the golden visa activities stimulate building more buildings. And the main reason why housing prices tend to rise is because there is more demand, more people coming in and buying, than there is real estate being constructed. And this is largely a regulatory and zoning issue. It's too long to get permits, it's too difficult, there's too much additional cost involved in the process. The zoning isn't set up for high density, so hence you have basically like a sprawl effect, and that sprawl effect means that certain isolated areas end up going up in value, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to put the blame on somebody's feet for rising real estate prices, you should definitely do it on local governments who have poor zoning, poor regulations, poor permitting. If they're adding to the supply quickly enough, and they will if there's an economic incentive to do so, that is to say the builders will, then you should have somewhat of an equilibrium. And we see this in a bunch of different areas. I lived for a number of years in Edmonton, in Alberta, and we would often see this. Like for a long period of time, there was virtually no house price increases, right? If you have that equilibrium of new supply and demand, you'll more or less keep prices fairly stable. Now, obviously, over time, you have some inflation in terms of the underlying cost of building materials, et cetera, but that should be in line with inflation. It should not be faster than inflation, which you have often seen. So very, very important to note this, this thing. So I think that it's a fallacy to say that in most cases, the rental prices, at least, and a lot of the other cost of living is going up because of these golden visa holders. Let's come to the last point, which is the sheer volume of cases. So if we look at Portugal, how many people have gone through the golden visa? Not actually that many. It's like a few thousand, right? And a few thousand is a few thousand. But what's really happened in Portugal is you've had a massive influx of a lot of people, far, far above what are coming in for the golden visa. And when you have a lot of people coming in who have money, who are earning abroad, who are used to making UK salaries, who are used to being in Germany or Denmark or something, and they come to Portugal and it seems cheap, they're going to spend money at a higher level, and that's going to drive prices up for locals. This is not a problem with golden visas. This is a problem just plain with immigration and too much immigration coming in relative to the increase in supply. What you need to do is you need to manage the supply. And if you don't want people coming into the country, fair, don't have them come in, or go and demand more of them, kind of create that balance equation so that you say, all right, well, we have more demand than we can handle anyway. So why don't we charge more for it? Why don't we come and say, well, you're going to have to give a donation of, $10,000, $20,000, $5,000, whatever the number happens to be. Like what you should have is some sort of market equilibrium that is coming into play. So generally speaking, I don't think it's great to use real estate as a form of a golden visa for a country. I don't think it's hugely beneficial for the country. But I also certainly don't think that it is fair or accurate to suggest that these problems are caused by golden visas. The reality is that bad people, if your rules are bad, they're bad across the board. It's not for golden visas. So people can come in regardless. It's just a question of which path. Number two, if the people are coming in, they're going to put pressure on the pricing. That's going to happen regardless. This is not a golden visa phenomenon for the most part. Three, often the people who are coming in are golden visas are not in a situation where they're actually going to spend so much time there. So the places are going to be rented out in a lot of cases. And as a result, you're not going to change the overall equilibrium. In fact, you may add to supply. And four, they're a relatively small percentage of the overall population because frankly, it's expensive. So anyway, give me your comments below. I would like to hear from you. If you would like help with getting golden visas somewhere in the world, if you'd like to relocate somewhere, if you're looking for a better place where you can pay lower taxes or have better weather or better quality of life, a culture that suits you better, please reach out to us, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.